So welcome to the 7th video in my series on the Russian Revolution. Pausing after a break for the struggle here in Britain, but returning to take up the story that we left in the previous video on February the 27th, the end of the 5 days of the February Revolution. But what was the response of the capitalists and the monarchy to that revolution? Well, on the evening of February the 27th, Rodzianko, who was the president of the Duma, has sent the Tsar a new telegram, ending with the words, "The last hour has come when the fate of the fatherland and the dynasty is being decided." Now the Tsar, Trotsky says, is recorded as responding, "Again that fat-bellied Rodzianko has written me a lot of nonsense." Of course, it wasn't nonsense. But outside Petrograd, it was scarcely possible to believe that the news coming from the revolutionary capital could be true. General Ivanov, who had successfully crushed the revolutionary sailors of Kronstadt in 1905, was ordered to march troops from the front to Petrograd to put down the rebellion. The ruling class still thought they had plenty of time in which to act. Meanwhile, in Petrograd, General Kabalov was trying to carry out an order to declare martial law in the capital. But not only did he have no forces to rely on, he couldn't apparently even find paste and brushes to stick up the declaration. Because during the 27th, the jails had been seized, political prisoners had been freed, the Bolsheviks, including the Petrograd leaders arrested in the early hours of the 26th, had gone straight to the workers' districts. They sought to meet up with the workers and soldiers to ensure that the revolution was carried through to the end. But the Mensheviks, like the members of the military industrial committees arrested at the same time, had taken quite a different line of march. They had set out for the Tauride Palace, home of the Duma, where some of the radical intelligentsia and a few revolutionary officers had been trying to set up a kind of revolutionary headquarters. And on the evening of the 27th, a stream of workers, soldiers and assorted radicals came to the palace looking for some kind of leadership. From there, detachments of soldiers were sent out to guard key points like the railway stations, and arrested generals, ministers, policemen and so on were brought to the palace to be imprisoned. However, the workers' districts didn't need orders from the Tauride Palace, and many distrusted these leaders that had suddenly appeared from nowhere. Indeed, the worker Bolsheviks and the best workers of the other left parties remained at the sharp end of the action, directing the mopping up operations of the 28th, making arrests and spreading the mutiny to new regiments in the capital and in surrounding areas. Now on the 28th, Ivanov telegraphed Kabalov to find out the latest news. Kabalov's reply tells its own story. Question: in what parts of the city is order preserved? Answer: the whole city is in the hands of the revolutionists. Question: what authorities are governing the different parts of the city? Answer: I cannot answer this question. Question: are all the ministries functioning properly? Answer: the ministers have been arrested by the revolutionists. Question: what police forces are at your disposal at the present moment? Answer: none whatsoever. Question: how many artillery stores have fallen into the hands of the mutineers? Answer: all the artillery establishments are in the hands of the revolutionists. And as Trotsky says, having received this unequivocal answer, Ivanov called off his mission to save the Tsar, and Kabalov himself was arrested soon after. So that was the real situation that was now dawning on the Tsar. So he finally began to suspect that Rodzianko had perhaps not been speaking nonsense after all. He decided to return in his train to Petrograd to rejoin his family. But the railway workers had other ideas. They wouldn't let him pass. There's a fantastic few pages describing how his train wandered from place to place, trying to find a way through. The Tsarina sending telegram after telegram to him, all being returned with the message, whereabouts of the addressee unknown. And then finally, on the night of March the 1st, the Tsar agreed to send a message to Rodzianko saying he was prepared to do a deal with the Progressive Bloc. But the Tsar's clock was way behind. Rodzianko replied, "Your proposal is not enough. It is now a question of the dynasty itself. The anarchy has reached such proportions that I, Rodzianko, was this night compelled to appoint a provisional government." So the Tsar has been forced to abdicate. But what was the character of this newly appointed provisional government? Well, while the proletariat and revolutionary soldiers had continued the real business of the revolution, the petty bourgeois radicals, true to form, had busied themselves with getting hold of positions of leadership. The freed Mensheviks, together with the Menshevik Duma deputies like Chidze and Skobelev, and other right-wingers like the trade union leaders, straightaway set about forming a provisional executive committee of the Soviet of Workers' Deputies, or for short the EC, the Executive Committee. And the EC soon filled out with various well-known socialists, including a few Bolsheviks, and summoned the workers to elect deputies at once to the Soviet. Now that tradition of Soviets, which had taken root in the movement thanks to the experience of 1905, together with the presence of some old recognised leaders, meant that this EC immediately became the focus of all hopes and also all authority for the mass of workers and soldiers. However, completely unlike the Soviet of 1905, its representatives were, on the whole, elements who played little or no role in the revolution itself. Their views and experiences did not coincide with those of the activists who had actually led the revolution in the streets. However, those revolutionaries had no organisation or well-known leaders with which to stamp their authority on events. So even in the cauldron of Petrograd, the consciousness of those fresh to the struggle lagged behind events. They hadn't time to free themselves from old opinions and prejudices during the rapid changes of the war years, let alone in the 5 days of the revolution. During the insurrection, the broad masses had followed the lead of the most revolutionary elements without being actively involved in the struggle themselves. Now, the middle-class officials, lawyers and other radicals elbowed the workers and soldiers to one side, leaning upon the illusions and inexperience of these fresher masses to build their personal positions. Now, the first session of the Soviet had taken place in the Tauride Palace on the evening of the 27th, and with some additions ratified that EC membership. And in the midst of proud and joyful speeches from Soviet deputies, it was agreed to build on the fraternisation of the days of revolution by uniting the garrison with the workers in a general Soviet of workers and soldiers' deputies. And certainly the inclusion of the representatives of the overwhelmingly peasant army gave the Soviets a much wider base of support, certainly than in 1905. From the beginning, the EC, in the name of the Soviet, acted as the nation's sovereign power. It organised the revolutionary staff, controlled the garrison, food supplies, the state bank and printing office, which it occupied with a revolutionary guard. However, even in these first days of victory, the socialists at the head of the Soviets were looking around for those that they felt should really have the power, and to them, that was the bourgeoisie. As Trotsky had suggested, the leaders of the Soviet EC showed their petty bourgeois inadequacy before the big bourgeoisie. Hiding their cowardice with theoretical arguments about the need to limit the struggle to a bourgeois revolution, they looked to the bourgeois leaders in the Duma to take the power from them. Now, bewildered by exaggerated reports that the masses were marching on the Duma, the bourgeois deputies in a panic hurriedly suggested forming a provisional committee. And it was this provisional committee of the Duma that the Soviet EC appealed to, demanding that they take power in their hands. However, the Duma leaders tried to stall, fearful of their positions in case the insurrection might turn out as in fact they still hoped, to be defeated. But in the end, on the 28th, realising that it might be the only way of tearing the revolution away from more threatening leadership, they decided to agree to the Soviet EC's demands. As Trotsky says, their moral was, if the monarchy wins, we are with it. If the revolution wins, we will try to plunder it. Trotsky quotes the reformist socialist Sukhanov, expressing his joy on behalf of the fearful middle class at the news that Rodzianko and the bourgeois were prepared to do this deal and take power. Sukhanov says, I felt that the ship of the revolution, tossed in the squall of those hours by the complete caprice of the elements, had put up a sail, acquired stability and regularity in its movements amid the terrible storm. As Trotsky says, what a high-flying formula for a prosaic recognition of the slavish dependence of the petty bourgeois democracy upon capitalistic liberalism. And, he adds, what a deadly mistake in political perspective. The handing over of power to the liberals not only will not give stability to the ship of state, but on the contrary, will become from that moment a source of headlessness of the revolution, enormous chaos, embitterment of the masses, collapse of the front, and in the future, the extreme bitterness of the civil war.